and welcome to Gardener's World, and to a long meadow that has been taken over in some respects. This is a moment in the gardening year when the garden seems to break free and run riot, and the spring garden at least is completely overwhelmed by a sea of billowing cow parsley. Now, you can see that as a terrible problem because it is a weed after all, or as something to celebrate, and that's certainly what I do. And yes, all kinds of plants are lost beneath this wave of white, but for the moment, there is this sense of the garden just being free to celebrate the fact of life and spring, and that is more than enough. On today's programme, we catch up with Joe at home as he gets to grips with a plant that has gone through the roof. Garden historian Adverley Richmond shares one of her plant passions.
Auriculas gladden my heart in the spring, especially with their cheerful, happy little faces and their colourful history.
And Carol gives us a cuttings masterclass.
Growing more plants is such an exciting way to fill your time. It's wonderful.
At the moment, the Jewel Garden is dominated by these alliums. This is allium purple sensation, probably the most intense colour of any allium. But if I don't plant now, there will be a gap, a time lag, when the alliums are finished and there isn't enough to take their place, and now is the time to start filling in those gaps. Now I'm going to put in a canna. I would say that this is a canna that has been hardened off now for at least 2 weeks. So my feeling is it's pretty well acclimatized. But you have to be flexible. If you get a weather warning or you're further north, just be patient. Right, a little gap in here. This is Canna, Wyoming, and you can see these lovely striped leaves, and then you have the orange flowers. Cannas like lots of moisture and lots of goodness, so if you've got very light soil, sandy or chalky, add masses of compost and they'll thank you for it. Let's pop this in here. Yeah, that's perfect. And then we'll just pack around it. Push the soil down in. It's a little scruffy because it's had a winter to cope with, but I can clean that up, and as new leaves grow, I can cut off the old ones. Now, I'm going to add this plant to the Jewel Garden this year, and I've never grown it in here before, although I have grown it in the vegetable garden, because this is chard. This is ruby chard, or rhubarb chard, as it's sometimes sold. And it tastes delicious. It's got these red stems and a purpley, coppery, veined leaf. It's really decorative, which means there's no reason why you can't grow it in the border just as well as you can in rows on an allotment or on your veg plot. But it will grow fairly big, not as big as a canna, but enough to rise up above the hedge. A perfect Jewel Garden plant. And then when I'm hungry, I'll come and pick some for supper. Now, it won't be long before I can get the rest of the cannas out and all my gingers and bananas and all the tender plants, probably a week or two. But I will have to bring them all in at the end of the season because it just isn't reliably warm enough here over winter to risk it. But in Joe's garden, in East London, where it's much milder, it means that he can keep his bananas growing all the year round outside. And they don't just thrive, they actually get too big.
So I planted these bananas 20 years ago. It's Musabashtu, it's the hardy banana, and they are absolutely loving the little microclimate I've got in this courtyard space. Now normally you'd have to wrap these trunks through the winter, otherwise they'll just die back into the ground, but they'll reshoot every year. In fact, this is the largest herbaceous perennial in the world. And I've actually had Hackney nanas on it several years. Beautiful fruit. But what that means is that that trunk is now going to die back, so I've got to cut it back. But you can see alongside it, we've already got another little plant that's just coming through. So that trunk I need to cut back down to the ground. And I also need to lose some of these leaves on the top as well, because they reshoot every year. You get nice fresh leaves up to about 3 meters long. They're so dramatic, they're wonderful. So all this has got to go, but it grows back so quickly that within a few days, literally, you'll see some new growth. I always cut at a little angle as well, which means that they sort of slide down better. This is fun. You see, this is about as fun as gardening gets, I tell you. They are the most amazing plants. Seriously dramatic and great fun to grow.
You can't really give cannas too much water, so if in doubt, give them a good soak. Same with bananas really, and Joe is absolutely right. Bananas are a joy to grow because they are so extreme. Now, we've been asking you to send us short films of you in your garden, and we've been overwhelmed. We've had over 3,500 fantastic films, so thank you very much indeed. We'll try and show as many as we can. And our first today means going up to Burnley in Lancashire, where Amna is sharing with us the sheer joy that she gets from her garden.
Hello, my name's Amna, and this is Pocket, and welcome to lovely Lancashire. I've been gardening now for about 3 or 4 years, and I really enjoy just playing with colour. I particularly enjoy being able to recycle, repurpose and reuse items in the garden. A great tip that I would like to share with you today is how to make your very own eco-friendly bird feeder. All you need to do is take an orange, scoop out the contents, seed. You can simply fill it with household food such as muesli or breadcrumbs. Always remember to leave fresh drinking water for our feathery friends. Remember, gardening should be fun, full of colour, and above all, make you smile.
Well, Amna has certainly learnt the most important element of gardening. In fact, the secret of being a good gardener is to enjoy yourself. I've got an Agapanthus here that's been having too good a time in this pot because it's grown, it's got bigger and bigger, it's got no more room to move, and it's simply cracked the pot that it's in. But I was always taught that the time to repot Agapanthus is when it breaks the pot. The meaning behind that is that Agapanthus like to be tightly constricted, and that makes them produce more flower in proportion to foliage. Now is a really good time to divide and repot them. Now, if I just take the pot here, and you can see it's thoroughly cracked. There you are. That's it. And with any luck, that will be able to be mended in due course. Now, this is a white evergreen Agapanthus. and they are a lot less hardy than the herbaceous Agapanthus. And the roots are unbelievably solid. That is a complete solid wedge of root. So I'm not going to be able to tease it apart. I'm going to have to cut it. I have brought along an old, very heavy billhook. And I think actually this is what I'm going to need to use, because I'm just going to have to chop it. A sharp spade might do it too. But don't be frightened, you'll not damage the plant. There we go. Now we can get to the sawing part. And there you go. Actually, that's worked quite well. Now I know that that looks pretty dramatic, but I promise you, this is one tough plant, and it can take it. So, Agapanthus like freely drained soil. So, a peat-free, bark-based compost with added grit if you've got it, or sharp sand, or perlite, vermiculite. It could even be sort of small stones. And if in doubt, make it grittier than not in wet compost than being a little on the dry side. So, we'll put a little bit in the bottom, and it's actually not going to take much at all. That can go in there like that, and then this one can be repositioned. And just tease that round it. That's it. A good rule of thumb for potting on Agapanthus is you don't need more than an inch or so of free space around the roots. If you divide your Agapanthus and it doesn't flower this year, don't worry, you've done nothing wrong. It simply means that the roots are putting all their energy into growing out and creating foliage. And when they meet the edge of the pot, then they will start to flower in earnest. Now, just because there isn't a lot of compost and just because they're South African plants, it doesn't mean to say they don't need watering. I will water these thoroughly and then feed them once a week or once a fortnight throughout the summer. So we build up a really good root system which will power those flowers. These are dramatic plants, and if you have them in a big plot, they really make a statement. But don't be intimidated about using them in a small garden. In fact, you should never worry about big plants in small spaces. And we saw a really good example of that in a film that we first showed last year. We had visited the garden of Dan Cooper in Broadstairs in Kent, who showed through a mixture of inspiration and ambition and skill and hard work just what you can do in a small garden if you set your mind to it.
I'm known as the frustrated gardener, and that's because I'm obsessed with plants, but I have only a very small space to grow them in. I love being surrounded by plants. I get completely lost in it sometimes and forget everything else that's going on outside. So I've got two small courtyards. The jungle garden measures 20 foot by 30 foot, and the gin and tonic garden is even smaller. It measures just 20 foot by 20 foot. When I came, there was an air raid shelter, 2 outdoor toilets, and some crazy paving, and that was all. So I enlisted the help of a designer to help me get my head around what the potential of the garden was. There's a bed that goes around the edge of the garden, and then everything else is in pots or trough of that shelter. It's ideal for tropical plants, which often grow under the canopies of much larger trees, and so they like a little bit of dappled shade. This amazing tree behind me is the Santa Cruz Ironwood tree. It comes from California. It grows on rocky north face canna musifolia, which is a canna that believes it's a banana. It has huge green leaves with a flush of red, and it shoots up 10, maybe 12 feet in a season. At the end, if I'm lucky, I might get some very small red flowers. They're definitely not the main event. They're a bit of a bonus. Sometimes plants just work really perfectly together, and I love this dahlia. It's called Nicholas. It's got fantastic flashes of red right there in the middle, and they flame out into yellow and then blend into this beautiful peach on the outside. And I think it's a really exquisite combination of colours, and it picks up this hedychium, which is called Stephen, and it's got these lovely spikes of flowers with beautiful coloured stamens. So Stephen and Nicholas make perfect partners. I'm quite a flamboyant person, so I love anything that's unusual or that people haven't seen before. I'm instantly drawn to. So this is a fuchsia you don't see very often in gardens. It's a species fuchsia, and what I love about it is these beautiful, soft, corally pink bells, and the fact that they're tipped with lime green. They keep on coming all the way through the summer. And it's not just the flowers that are beautiful here, it's also the foliage. It's lime green, and it has a little haze of grey over the top because of the little furry fibres on the surface. So I would encourage anyone with a really small garden to think big about what they want to do. I nearly fell into the trap of thinking very small, of not really being ambitious enough with what I could do. Make it what you want, and don't feel that there's anything really that you can't grow, because with a bit of thought and attention and planning, you can grow all.
I do agree with every word of that. And there's no reason to have your imagination fettered, even though your space is limited. Now, a plant that is beginning to take over the grass borders in the same way that the cow parsley has taken over the spring garden is this red campion. This will continue flowering for the rest of this month and into June, and I love it. And like cow parsley, this is a wildflower. We never planted it. It's come in, and it's welcome. Now, from one of my favourite plants of the moment to a favourite plant of the plant historian, Adverley Richmond. And she made a film about it in her own garden at home.
As a garden historian, I love having pieces of history in my garden, like old varieties of flowers, but I also can't resist a garden feature. This is an auricular theatre, popular in the 18th and 19th centuries and built especially to display these amazing little plants. Auriculas are members of the Primula family and originated in Europe from the Alps. But their journey and their breeding have a long and rather beautiful story. From just a few wild plants in the 1400s, collectors began to cultivate auriculas to try and get the most elaborate range of colours and patterns. In fact, the term florist was first used in 1623 for these amateur enthusiasts who cultivated these new varieties. At first, this was a mainly aristocratic pursuit, as only they could afford these rare and expensive plants, and their expert gardeners. These new plants often had regal names to match, but some were more eccentric. One was named Cock. Auricular theatres enabled these little flowers to be displayed together, often at head height, making the plants easier to admire. But once the Industrial Revolution arrived, these ornate blooms slid down the social ladder. They became popular with working people like weavers and miners, as they were able to grow these little plants on their windowsills, even if they didn't have a garden. New trends were evolving all the time, so doubles and stripes had been in and out of fashion. But then it became all about the edges, bright colours, frilly bits and even scent. This has an amazing fragrance. It's called Blush Baby. The majority of auriculas don't have a scent, but what I love about them is the intense colouring and the amazing detail. The trends continued with auricular leaves. Most were plain green, but some varieties were cultivated with a flowery coat and fondly known as dusty millers. Dusties don't like getting wet, but many weavers worked from home, a bit like we're all trying to do now, and they were able to nip out and protect them from the weather. Auriculas are easy to grow, but they like well-drained compost, so I mix in grit when I'm repotting. Some people use bark. And do keep them in the shade, because they'll be much happier there. They really gladden my heart in the spring, especially with their cheerful, happy little faces and their colourful history.
I love auriculas too, and I like the formality of the theatre, but what we have here on this table outside the potting shed is entirely in that spirit. It's a display of plants that are carefully grouped together like a flower arrangement. And we have bulbs in spring, and now the succulents have come out. I appreciate them. But whatever you use and whatever space it is, it does all stem from those auricular theatres. Now, I've got cuttings here, some dahlia cuttings from David Howard, lovely orange dahlia with a dark leaf. And I took them about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I don't know if you can see, but the roots are starting to appear at the bottom of the pot. And you know that they're ready to move on, either if you can see the roots or you see fresh growth. Now, the thing to do is be quite careful, because the roots will be fragile and there won't be a lot of them. So I'm just going to empty the whole thing out into here, trying not to be too forceful about it. There we go. All those roots are formed. 6 new dahlias. And if I gently tease them apart, there you are. Look at that lovely root system. So I've got a pot, put some compost in, and dahlias like quite rich compost. That can go there like that, shake it down. And it's not too late to take dahlia cuttings, by the way. They won't flower much before October, but it's a very good way of making new plants for next year, and you might get some flowering out of them. There we go. Now, I've been gardening for a long time now, since I was a small boy. So I always like it when we hear from our younger viewers, and we've had a smashing film from Callie in Carmarthenshire.
Hello Gardeners World, my name is Karen and I'm 6 years old. I live in Llanelli and I'm going to show you my gardening. While I'm off school, I decided to do some gardening. Here are some of my plants. This is my sunflower. This is a tomato plant. My pumpkin plant has grown really quickly. Look how big it's growing. I wanted to make my community smile. I decided to plant some sunflowers and give them away. When people are walking past to exercise, they can pick up a free plant on their way. I made this sign to show people what we have. Anyone who wants a plant can take one. We are watering them every day until they find a new home. I hope they brighten up people's gardens. Thank you for watching my video. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep gardening.
Well, Callie, those are wise words. And thank you very much for sending your film. I loved it. The vegetable garden here at Longmeadow is really important and always has been. Vegetables, I suppose, were my first love with gardening. But it's never the same every year. You just have to go with the weather. Also with what vegetables you want to eat. And carrots are something that are easy to grow if you get a certain few basic elements right. And the idea for carrots is to have them as part of a rotation if you can. Now, rotation of vegetables is not something to get hung up on. It's simply to avoid a build-up of diseases. And it is quite important that you don't add manure or compost to the ground that you're going to grow carrots in. And if you do find that your carrots are splitting, that's probably as a result of too recent an application of manure or compost. And the only other thing you need to worry about at all is good drainage. Carrots don't like growing in very heavy, wet soil. And rake it to a fine tilth, which basically means removing as many lumps as possible. And then you just sprinkle the seed. And actually, I like to broadcast the carrots in rows. So, effectively, the board is acting like masking tape and blocking off that area. And then you can sprinkle the carrot seed along this strip of soil at the edge. Now, I've got a variety here, which I've never grown before, called Purple Sun. And carrots originally were either sort of shades of white or purple. Now, there are not many seeds in here, which is not a bad thing because when you're growing carrots, you want to grow them as thinly as possible. In an ideal world, they'll be spaced out about an inch or two apart. Right, so that's that one. So that's one variety, which is Purple Sun. I'll just put that there like that. And then the next one, I've got carrot mixed colours. So there will be yellow, purple, orange. And if you've got children, this is a brilliant thing to do because enthusiasm and fun is just as important as growing a prize crop of any kind. And also, if they enjoy growing them, they're much more likely to enjoy eating them too. So for this, to keep the spacing, get another board, put it down next to it, and then flick it over. So now what we have is another strictly weed. And the reason why I grow them like this is because it avoids thinning them. And thinning carrots is always the danger moment. Because carrot fly have an amazing sense of smell. And thinning draws them to them. They lay their eggs on the surface, and then when they hatch out, the larvae eat the roots of the carrot. So I sprinkle them like this, and I don't thin at all. I don't touch them until it's time to harvest. Now, you don't have to have a garden to grow carrots. Carrots grow very well in a container. I did it last year. Make sure it's deep enough for the roots to develop, but just sprinkle them over the surface of some compost, water them, and they will germinate after a few weeks. And keep them well watered. What they do tend to do is dry out a bit in a container, and you'll get a good crop. Right. That's 2 rows sown. You just cover the seed over. I'm going to run my fingers through it, but you can run a rake through it just as easily. Like that. Of course, water them. And if it's very dry, give them another sprinkle. But by and large, carrots find the moisture. They've got deep tap roots. Now, nearly all vegetables are raised from seed, and that's half the magic of it, taking a tiny seed and raising it to become part of a delicious meal. And that magic never wanes. But there are lots of ways of propagating, particularly when it comes to other parts of the garden. And no one knows more about propagation than our Carol.
My garden at Glebe Cottage. I love it. We've been here for more than 40 years, and when we came here, it was bare. It wasn't a garden at all. So nearly everything in it has been grown from seeds, from cuttings, from divisions. I've bought a fair few plants too, and I ran a nursery for 30 years, so I had to propagate lots and lots of plants myself. And I suppose propagating, making more plants for free, is at the top of everybody's minds at the moment. We've all found ourselves with much more time on our hands than we ever imagined we'd have. And growing more plants is such an exciting way to fill your time. It also teaches you all about the plants you grow. It's wonderful. Pelargoniums are one of the most straightforward plants to grow. They're an absolute cinch. All those osteospermums were just from a few cuttings from one plant. This tray of little red salvias was taken just a few months ago. Taking cuttings guarantees you're going to get exactly the same plant as its parent, because it's a way of cloning plants. It's vegetative propagation. One of the most colourful bunch of plants are the salvias. This is a lovely pink one called Wendy's Wish, and I'm going to be propagating from that and showing you just how to take those cuttings. What you want to do is take a sharp knife. You can use secateurs if you're nervous about that. You want to cut right under a leaf node, straight through like that. Always do it first thing in the morning, because that's when your plants are turgid. Those stems are full of moisture, so they won't wilt nearly as quickly. So with this cutting, I'm going to remove these bottom leaves. So the reason I remove these basal leaves is just to make sure you've got a good piece of straight stem with no leaves on there at all. If the leaves go under the compost, then there's a danger they can rot. So they're out of the way, and then what I do, because all plants have got the tendency for apical dominance, which just means that they want to head for the sky. Well, you don't want your cutting to do that. You want it to bush out. So I'm going to take that whole top little shoot out there. So I've got a much shorter cutting. And now I've got to get it into this compost as quickly as I can. I'm using clay pots. They're better for cuttings simply because they're made of earth and the cutting feels much more at home. Also, they let water out of the side of them, so your cutting's never going to sit in stagnant water. But you can use absolutely anything. You can use an old yogurt pot. It'll work anyway. I've got nice gritty compost here. It's a nice open mix. If you haven't got it, try and avoid using garden soil, but at a pinch you can do it like that. Now, I've got my trusty chopstick. Sharpen a stick if you haven't got one, and I'm just making a hole right at the edge of the compost, and then lower that cutting down until those tops. That's really, really important. So you've got all that stem under the ground now that can make lots and lots of root. I'll twist it round and I'll continue to take cuttings from here. So there's a good straight piece. Again, right under a leaf node. Remove those bottom leaves. Nip out the top. Although I have great faith that my cuttings will work, I never really understood how they did it until a very good botanist explained it in simple layman's terms. He said, if you're a mammal, human being, if the sun gets hot, you can move out of the way, buy yourself an ice cream. But if you're a plant, you've got to stay where you are. So plants actually have this facility to change the function of their cells. So what has been a stem cell on this stem can change itself into a root cell. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Try and space them out so that they're not touching one another, and just firm them in gently as you're doing that. And go in for another cutting. And then grab a handful of grit and put it all over the top. Now the reason you use grit is not because I've got shares in a grit quarry as some people think. It's because it does three things. It retains moisture once this is watered. It will make sure that these cuttings don't rot around their tops because it provides really good drainage, and it should stop weeds from germinating in your compost, especially if you've got to use old stuff. There you go, and then you want to get it into a shady place quickly while you water it. And this is the first initial watering is really, really important. Absolutely drench the whole thing. Right, so that's the first pot of cuttings done. You can increase your stock of a whole range of plants by taking stem cuttings. Pelargoniums of every size and shape are easy. And you'll find that ever-popular fuchsias will root readily too. Then there are salvias galore for late summer colour that lend themselves to this technique. It's straightforward and incredibly rewarding. Now you don't have to have a greenhouse. You can do this on your kitchen windowsill. You can do it absolutely anywhere, providing you just make sure they're out of direct sun pot. Turn the whole pot out gently and give each one its own individual pot. When they've made decent plants, and that won't take very long, then out they can go into the garden, into your window box, into containers. And within a few weeks of them being planted out, they'll have made strong, sturdy plants. And who knows, by the end of the summer, you may be taking cuttings from your cuttings.
It's really good to have a masterclass showing how simple taking cuttings can be. Now this area of the garden is the herb garden. And on this side we have the Mediterranean herbs because it's much sunnier. And Mediterranean herbs love as much sun as you can give them and poor soil, and that's really important. So don't try and grow them in a bed that's been richly manured. And I'm talking about plants like rosemary, thyme, oregano, and sage. And there are a number of different types of sage. You can have the straight officinalis, which we have here and I have growing in different parts of the herb garden. You can have a purple sage, that's variegated sage, and sage with different sizes of leaf. But they are a shrub, and a woody shrub, and it's quite important that you cut them back every spring. So once you start to see new growth, cut them back hard. And what you should be left with are just a few leaves growing from the bare wood. But the harder you cut them, the more compact they will keep, and in the long run, the longer they will last. And so this has had a hack back, it's regrowing perfectly well. You can see this has got fairly large leaves. But although this is a good plant and I'm happy to grow it, my favourite sage for cooking has very different leaves to this. Now this is a narrow leaf sage, Salvia levandulifolia. If I just pick a piece off, compare the size and shape of the leaves. But although the leaves are smaller, they have perfect taste. Now, this bush has seen better days, and I'd like more of them anyway, so I'm going to take cuttings from it. And it doesn't matter if a plant is old and quite frankly knackered, it can still give you really healthy cuttings that will become lovely, fresh, vigorous new plants. Put that in the bag, close it up, that I treat this as something that can't be put off. I'll deal with it right now. Now I have got some terracotta pots, as Carol suggested. I also take cuttings a lot in plastic pots, and as we're all very aware of, we want to reuse plastic, so don't feel that they're not going to work. They will work just as well in plastic. So just remove the lower leaves, exactly as Carol did, and pop that in down to there. And we'll work around the edge. Now, you can cut the leaves off if there's a risk of tearing these soft stems. Pop that in there. Put some grit over the top of that. I think this is something that when the opportunity arises, get yourself some grit. Don't worry if you haven't got it. So we will put Salvia lavandulifolia, which basically means salvia with leaves that look like lavender. Now that needs watering, but because they're softwood cuttings, and therefore will die very quickly unless they grow roots, they need to be kept moist. That doesn't mean to say the soil kept moist, but the air. So I'm going to put them in the greenhouse. Now, if you don't have a mother plant to take cuttings from, you can still grow sage, or for that matter, any herb at all, because they grow very well from seed. And you'll find that you can buy seed of sage very easy. This tends to be the aficionados. So, a peat-free compost, and the seeds are quite big, and I probably should put my glasses on. There we are. And as ever, try and space them evenly. But you can see one little packet of seed, if they all germinate and if they all grow well, is going to give me dozens of sage bushes. And now cover those with grit. But if you don't have grit, a little bit of sieve compost is fine. But they will grow up through the grit without any trouble at all. And what the grit does is hold them in place and means that when you water them, they won't be knocked around. I very often use the... And obviously I need to water these, and the seed don't need anything like the careful treatment of the cuttings. Put them to one side. If you've got a greenhouse, that's fine, but the windowsill is perfect, or a frame. Then when the plants have two true leaves, they can be pricked out and grown on, and they can be planted out either in the autumn, or if you live in a wet area as I do, probably better next spring. Now, buying seeds is how most of us get hold of them, but it's much more fun to collect seed yourself. And you'll be surprised where you can collect that seed from. Linda Kelly sent us this film from Kells in Ireland.
Hi, my name is Linda and I've been gardening for about 2 years, and I've managed to grow some different things just by using seeds from fruit and veg that I have in the fridge. So for sunflowers, I just took them from my big bucket of birdseed, and after about only a week they germinated like this. Then for a strawberry plant, I just took out the little seeds here with the corn on the cob holder, allowed them to dry out for about 2 days, and then just pushed them into some seed soil. And now they've actually grown already in a space of 2 weeks, so that will be a strawberry plant. You can utilise old plastic cupcake holders for this sort of thing. I've managed to take the seeds out of a cherry tomato that I had for my lunch one day, and I let it dry out on the tissue first for a few days, and then eventually I got this. So that's my tomato plant.
That's completely admirable. In fact, Linda, you make me feel guilty that I don't make more effort to collect seeds. But I promise I will. And thank you so much, everybody who sent their films in. We will continue showing them for as long as we can. Right, I'm mixing up seaweed feed for tulips, because most, particularly if you're growing them in a container, can be helped to flower better next year by giving them a bit of feed after they've finished this year's flowers. So in this pot that's just finished, if I take off the seed heads, so the energy is all going back into the bulb, and I feed it with a seaweed feed or a tomato feed once a week until all the foliage has died back, that gives a better chance of it making bigger bulbs next year. Feeds into the bulb, and that makes next year's flower. All you have to do is just water it on. Now, a couple of years ago, we showed a film, garden belonging to Mike Clifford in Poole in Dorset, and I think it's worth another look, because Mike suddenly felt inspired to transform his garden, and it wasn't just your average makeover. This was a change at every level, with every type of plant. So Adam felt he had to go down and have a look.
Wow, I've literally just come off a busy main road, and this is no average front garden. I could well be in the tropics. The atmosphere in this garden is absolutely fantastic. You feel like you could be sort of moving through a jungle, and the planting's really dense but detailed sort of beautifully. And I'm looking around and there's plants that I recognise, but also there's so many in here that I don't. It just leaves me really wanting to find out more. The creator of this suburban paradise is Mike Clifford. It's a stunning garden, mate. How did you actually go about designing it?
Well, I actually designed it one wet Sunday afternoon on a piece of paper, and I drew out the scale, and I just tried to maximise the space. So the summer house is right in the corner, we've got a potting shed behind, all the borders interlinked so you can't see where you're going. It was just trying to make the best use of space.
Yeah, because actually, though it's not a big garden, you can get lost at different points as you move
I often
through.
get lost, yeah. My wife's always searching for me down the garden. So in here I've got some of my favourite plants that I grow as my giant dandelions, Sonchus.
And seed heads, the same look?
Exactly the same as a dandelion. And these are going to flower this year. These are 2 years from seed.
And I love the fact that actually most people are trying to get rid of dandelions, mate. You're collecting them.
There's a tapioca plant through there with that
yeah.
beautiful snowflake leaf. It's a stunning plant for having, with this mix of cut leaves. I've got chefleurers.
Because I think that as a designer, you know, some of the plants I recognise, some I don't. But there's so much interest even without flower, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. An interesting plant. Brachyglottis rapanda.
Wow, that's a mouthful, mate.
Absolutely. Can you guess what its common name's called?
No, go on, what is it?
Bushman's toilet paper.
It is, seriously, is that?
It's used as toilet paper in Australia, yeah.
So you're telling me when you're stuck upstairs and you run out, you send the missus out to pick something?
Just a few leaves, yeah.
Wow. This feels like you could be eating in here, doesn't it?
This is my cold greenhouse. This is full up with ferns and sarracenia and Venus flytraps, full of flies as well.
This is obviously a lot of propagation goes on. Give us an idea on how you go about it.
Well, most of the stuff's seed grown, to be honest. A lot of them are seeds or cuttings.
But in reality, you can do this on a budget.
You could do this on a very tight budget, yes. Yeah, seeds are incredibly cheap, and you could grow a good tropical border for £50 any year. Yeah.
I think you might be setting yourself a challenge there.
I think I might be. Yeah, I think I might be.
has never ceased to amaze me, and I think over the years I've learned to design them, build them and care for them. I feel a bit like a GP. I know a bit about, I suppose a lot of stuff, but you come somewhere like this, and he's a specialist, and he's been on this journey and learnt about exotics. I'll be honest with you, it's infectious, and I think for me now, I'm going to go home, I'm going to look at the planting, and maybe I am going to add just a few exotics.
I think that exotic plants can be accommodated into any garden. You don't need to have a tropical garden or an exotic look. You can add them to your style, whether it's formal or informal, wildlife garden or whatever. It can certainly add a really fascinating depth and layer of pleasure and design. Now, I want to make some comfrey feed. To encourage flowers and fruit, you don't want a high nitrogen feed. What you want is lots of potash. A basic tomato feed does the job, but by making your own, you have unlimited supply, it's free, and nothing works better than comfrey. Now, if you've got comfrey plants, the easiest way to do it is simply cut from the base like that and chop it up, or you could just use the leaves. And by the way, even if you don't make a feed, these make a fabulous addition to any compost heap. They really help. So just take the leaves off and then fill a bucket. And by fill, I mean really pack them in till you can't get another leaf in there at all. What I would call half full. But when it is full or you've run out of leaves, simply take the bucket and then top it up with water and just cover the leaves. Because you're not making the final thing, you're making a concentrate. So this will be a thick brown liquid. You can see that, if I push that down, there's plenty of water in there. Now put that somewhere out of the way, because this plant has an extraordinarily high level of protein in it. And as the protein breaks down, it smells, frankly, disgusting. It is the only bad thing about comfrey feed. So, stick it around the back of a shed, forget about it for 3 weeks, and then you sieve it, and then you put that in a container, and then that's the concentrate that you use for your feed. Well, that's a little job that I do every year at this time of year. But here are some jobs that you can do this weekend. If, like me, you planted trees, hedges, or even shrubs in the winter, don't forget to water them well and give them a good soak every week for the rest of the summer. And this will set them up for life. If you have a pond of any size, give it a bit of a spring clean. Remove any dead material or old leaves, but don't discard them straight away. Put them on the edge of the pond, so any dragonfly larvae, frogs or newts can crawl back into the water. Leave it for a couple of days and then take it to the compost heap. Lily beetles have become an increasing problem on all members of the lily and fritillary families. However, they are bright red, so easy to see. Approach them carefully, because if they hear the vibrations of your footsteps, they fall off the plant and lie on their backs on the ground, and as their underside, then dispatch them as you feel fit. As many of you will know by now, Nigel died earlier this week. He was such an important part of us, the family, of this garden, and I know for many of you he was much loved, and we're all going to miss him very much indeed. Now, obviously you can imagine it's been really difficult because of Nigel, and it's been strange not to have him here. But he had a good life, and the best thing we can do It's to celebrate all the lives of those that we love, whether they are our pets, our friends, our family. And I'm just thankful that I had 12 years of a good friend. And I'll be back here next week with Nellie, with Patty, with the garden. And I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Good boy.